We are up to the Mishnah on Daf Mem Hey. We know from a pasuk it says ish that not only if a Yisrael brings a carbon does it have the din of a carbon, but goyim also can bring karbanos as well. That's the whole story of Tisha B'av. We're looking more Gittin. Ish, it says double ish, that seems to a koil goyim. The question is, what is the status of the animal that a goy brings? Is it identical to a Yiddish carbon that has all the dinim of a Yiddish carbon, or do we say that even though the goy's animal is a carbon, nevertheless it's a lower level of kedusha? Therefore, a number of dinim that apply to a Yiddish carbon don't apply to a goyish carbon.
Does a goy eat from his carbon when he brings it?
He could. Why not? A goy is allowed. A goy can take a carbon. What's the name? A goy can take his carbon and bring it outside the base of Mikdash. Doesn't have to be brought in the base of Mikdash. If it brought it in the base of Mikdash,
it doesn't have the same gather of kedusha.
For sure, he can do whatever he wants. But if he brings it to the base of Mikdash, what happens now? The animal itself. We say that it only applies to. Was a machlek oile for sure, because that's what the pasuk is talking about. Ishish. Yeah, but that's what the pasuk is talking about. Ishish. We learn goy, and then we, according to most, you could also do nedarim v'nedavis. But those kabbalas. But he doesn't have the idea of a chatus or any carbon which is chayiv. He doesn't have. So says the Mishnah, Kodshe, machlek is a Shimon Rabbi Yosi. Kodshe, the carbon of a goy, ein chayavin aleyen. Their kabbanas, according to Rabbi Shimon, is going to be a step lower than a yid. So even though it's a carbon, you have no chiv on it for pigul. If a person's mafagel,
brings a carbon, has it got a time where we have all these carbon?
Yeah, but if it's brought in the base of English, the laws apply. But the question is,
but what does he bring?
Everything.
I
You cannot. I just said you cannot bring a carbon chayv. You can only bring either an oil, according to some others, including nedarim v'nedavis, and whatever the laws are there. Day and night and all that. Now, when we say over here, "Ein chayavin" means you're not chayav kares. It's still an avera. No, it's a carbon, but it's a step lower. It's ein chayavin shepigul. If you mafagel and then you ate it in the due time, if a yid eats it, there's no kares. Stop from the zayin mitzvah the next. So if a yid eats it, there's no kares. Noiser, it does not have the din of noiser. You don't get kares or tameh. And we're talking, there's two ways of learning tummy. Tummy is either the animal's tummy, which only is a lav, or if you're tummy and you get kares, you don't get kares. And if you shafted b'chutz potted, there's no din of shchitas chutz. So the guy can bring the carbon outside, and even if he brings it, there's no din of kares. Divrei Reb Shimon, Rabbi Yosi is mechayiv. Rabbi Yosi holds chayiv. There's a machlekes in the Achronim. Rabbi Yosi mechayiv. It means actually the Shonim. He's arguing the whole Mishnah. He holds it's the same status as a Yid, which is how Rashi learns the whole Gemara. Others say a little bit differently. Says the Gemara that's only limited to this last case of Hashoich and Bechutz. He says, "Oh, you chayiv as well." Says the Gemara, but let's understand what's going on here. The kotche of a goy loinanin. You're not allowed to have any hanar from it because it's a carbon, but it's only midirabanan v'loy moilin. But if you use it for yourself, you're not stealing. Why? It does not have the same status as a carbon of a yid. And the ain't chayav in the lamish of pigul noisiv and tummy. Same like the Mishnah says, you don't have these chayuvim of nois and tummy and pigul. And the ain't oisin temuda. It doesn't have enough kedusha. Just like we learned, kedusha is dummy. If the animal itself is not holy, it's only a value. You cannot transfer that kedusha to another animal. It has to be kedusha zaguf. So therefore, we're saying also that because the goyish carbon is a step down, it don't have the capacity to transfer that kedusha to another animal. And we'll soon see how do we know all this? They cannot buy a yid. There's two kinds of nesachim we had before. It comes with a carbon. Every carbon requires nesachim. Plus, you can bring your own, make a donation, just nesachim. A goy does not have the capacity to donate nesachim because that pasuk ishish is either talking about only noila or we're also including the darim and the davas, but not nesachim. Our karbanon ton nesachim, but their carbon because that's a din in the carbon. A carbon requires needs nesachim, and so a goy is the same thing. Divrei Reb Shimon. Rabbi Yosi says, I disagree. I hold that a goy's carbon has the same status as a yid's carbon. We're talking about if a goy brings a carbon, is it equal to a yid, which is Rabbi Yosi? So all the sudim and the kadosh you get for pigul applies there. Or even though they might be usher, but there's no kadosh, you don't get that kind of punishment. If Shimon holds it's a step down. Shenemar, why do I think that they're all the same? Because in that very pasuk where it says ish, we learn that the idea of a goy, it says there, Asher yakivu Hashem loila. What? It's Yakrivu La Hashem. It's the same status as a Yid. Okay, then it continues. Rashi learns Bamedvar and Murim will go back to Reb Shimon. Others will learn that this Rabbi Yosi is still talking. But wait, let's learn Rashi. Rashi is, but Medran, when does Rab Shimon say that a guy's carbon is a step down from a yid? Is by kachim mizbeach. By kachim, they go to the mizbeach, and therefore there's no meila, stealing by guy's carbon. Avol be kachim bedek habayis. If a guy donates to the base hamikdash for bedek habayis, for maintenance of the base hamikdash, then it's not a kedushas haguf. If the animal itself is not holy, then moilin behem. Then it's full kedusha, and if you use it, you're stealing. According to some Amoraim, in fact, the whole din of Mila only applies to kachim bedek habayis, not the regular kachim. So by a goy bedek habayis, Rab Shimon is moided that it's equal to a yid, and you're stealing. When he argues, his kachim is only by the actual carbon itself. And others say we're talking about Rabbi Yossi. When does Rabbi Yossi argue that Rabbi Shimon only in Kotche Bedek Habayis? Talking about Loinen, now we're going to go through each step. Loinen, when we say you shouldn't have Hana from a guy's carbon midrabban. When we say V'loi Moilin, but on the other hand, if you use it for yourself, you're not really stealing. Is the Gomar Me'ila? We learn out Me'ila. Where do you learn out the whole idea of Me'ila? You're not allowed to steal. We learn out Chet Agzer Shava Chet Metruma. It says if a person simul mal, you're stealing, and so on and so forth. And it says there, what do you call it? And it says v'chata b'shgaga. So I have the word chet. And by truma we find the same thing. It says v'lo yisol of chet. So we make a shava. We learn out a number of dinim of meila from truma. And by truma it says in that very pasuk it says the next pasuk v'lo yichalos kotche b'nei Yisrael. It's limited only to b'nei Yisrael. So we go back to the shava chet by meila. It's only what by Yiddish carbon. The Turmik say b'nei Yisrael lo every chav on Eden agoyim. It's still awesome, but if you're not chayiv kares, if you buy the goy's carbon, you had in mind the wrong time. My time, and we had this yesterday. The awesome we learn out. Where do you learn out pigul from? You learn out ovain menoisa. Right? By pigul it says you carry your sin, and by noisa it says you carry your sin. So we compare pigul to noisa. No, what does have to do with anything? And v'asi noisa chil metuma. And then we had the other Gzei Shava, and we learned yesterday that a Gzei Shava, B you learn from A via Gzei Shava, you could then learn C from B via Gzei Shava. And by Tumah, what does it say? And by Tumah it says B'nai Yisrael. So v'nozu v'nekatcha B'nai Yisrael. So the din of Tumah is only by Yid. The v'loiv gechavim, and not a goy. You don't have the capacity to make Tumah from the kachim of a goy. My time, why not? The iskish Tumah l'maisa behema. We compare Tumah to maisa behema. Why? Because it says "V'hayahu to Menasa Yekadish," right? It says in Bechukaisai. So about Ma'aseh Behema, Asidi Yekadish Hashem, and then it says "V'hayahu to Menasa Yekadish." The whole idea tomorrow we learn out from Ma'aseh Behema. No, so what's up to do only with Eden? And Ma'aseh Behema Ishkish Ma'aseh Dogan. We have a pasuk Asa to Asa. We say there's two Ma'asehs that Torah talking about. One is Ma'aseh Dogan. That was the Ma'aseh that you give, the 10% that you give, or that. So Maisa Dogon that you give, and the other one is the Maisa of a behemoth. So we compare Maisa behemoth to Maisa Dogon. We compare Tumura to Maisa behemoth. So what? And we know that the din of Maisa Dogon only applies to a Yid. A Goy, even if he owns property in Israel, has no obligation to give Maisa Dogon. With Maisa Dogon, and by Maisa Dogon, it says clearly in the pasuk, Bnei Yisrael. It says Bnei Yisrael, and therefore, because it says the Kes Masa Bnei Yisrael. It says clearly, Masa b'nei Yisrael. The Ma'aseh Dogan is b'nei Yisrael, and not goyim. So what do you have like this? You have a double hekasha. The Ma'aseh Dogan, you compare Ma'aseh Behema to Ma'aseh Dogan, and Ma'aseh Dogan is limited to Yidden. So Ma'aseh Behema is also only limited to Yidden. And then you compare Tumura to Ma'aseh Behema. So therefore, since a goy is not shaykh to Ma'aseh Behema, therefore a goy is not shaykh also to Ma'aseh Dogan. In other words, even though it seems from here that even though that Maisa Behema is l'chayda not from the same mitzvah b'neiach, so what we would have thought that if a goy does Maisa, it has a kedusha. The whole idea of Tumura is there's a kedusha in animal A, it translates to B. So let's say it wouldn't have been a pasuk. What would we have thought? If a guy takes an animal and says, "I'm making this Maisa Behema," but if it's garnished, then what do you need what do you need the whole pulpit for? There's nothing to talk about.
Why is it said in the pasuk?
Yes. Now, when we talk about Tumura, we're talking about the animal that he was makdish can transfer to which is kaidish. Ish is transfers. So it seems from here that even if it was, you don't have a mitzvah Maisa Behema, but if you once you declared Maisa as chal, And we have a pasuk that number 11 becomes 10, number 9 becomes 10. You made a mistake in the numbers, it becomes Kodesh. So is the pshat that once we learn those psukim out, it teaches us that the kedusha ma'aseh behem is different than other things, because hegdish tells us not hegdish. That ma'aseh is maybe different. That even if you don't have the chi, because there's no chi in number 11, there's no chi in number 9. That somehow or another there's some kind of kedusha there. So maybe by a goy also, if he, even though there's no not zayin mitzvah, but if he made it ma'aseh behemim, maybe there's some kind of kedusha. So you would have thought that there's something there to transfer to the next one. You have to say that, otherwise, what do you this whole pulpit for? It never became. If ma'aseh behemim never became ma'aseh, then obviously there's no tumah there, and the whole din of tumah you learn from ma'aseh behemim, so doesn't talk about. Maybe anyway. Ma'aseh dogin say b'nei Yisrael, ma'aseh dogin it says b'nei Yisrael and not goyim. Now we have a problem. The problem is we learned before already. If it B, you learn from A via hekesh, you cannot learn C from B via hekesh. So this is all hekeshim. The chidav lam behekesh, chodim lam behekesh. Says the Gemara, ma'aseh dogon chulunu. Remember, you're learning it all from ma'aseh dogon. That's not hekesh. When do we say this? Apply this rule of a hekesh? If they're all hekesh along the line. But here the original is ma'aseh dogon. That's what says Bnei Yisrael, and that's chulun. Because even after you give it to the Levi, who can eat from the ma'aser? Anybody can eat from the ma'aser. There's no kedusha in it. So therefore, it can teach. Now the question is, what's the primary thing? The malamed or the lamad? The teacher or the student? So it's a machlekes amoraim. When we say this rule hekesh and hekesh, that if one of them is chulin, it's all right. Are we talking about the melamed, the original, or are we talking about the lomad, the beneficiary? So look at the original. Okay, that was chulin, no problem. You go after the beneficiary, which is what? Which we're talking about over here is we're talking about kachim. Right, the tzmura and everything else. Ma'ikal meimer. Ela ma'aseh behema, another shot. Ma'aseh behema is a chayv. She'ein kvu lazman. Ma'aseh behema is a chayv that doesn't really have a fixed time. The chayv she'ein lazman kvu. You saw ma'aseh v'chav ma'aseh, and goyim don't bring a carbon that's not as man kvu. Now, as Rashi points out of it, don't do as man kvu. The main thing is chayv. A goy cannot bring a chatas. A goy cannot say I bring a noshim. You can only bring voluntary kabbanas. So what's the gay here? Ain't as man kvu. Because it's what Rashi is saying. We're just saying that because oila, even if he wants to bring an oilas nedava, if he says the word oilas nedava, since oila itself in the category of chayiv, so therefore you would have thought that a goy, would have a certain whatever kedusha. So he's telling you that because that it's also ein lezman kvua, the goy doesn't do it. But the bottom line is that a goy can only bring voluntary kabbanas, and ma'aseh behema is a chiyuv. If you have 10 animals, the 10th animal is your ma'aseh, and therefore you can't learn from there. You can't learn from there. Then he says, we learned Ezra. It says in Pasuk that anyone who's every single yid, we're talking about Nesachim now, right? Nesachim on its own, you cannot, we say a goy doesn't bring. Why not? It says Ezra, it says in the Pasuk Ezra, he says, well, you can, the kol Ezra Yasser Kacha, you bring in Nesachim if you want to. Ezra maybe Nesachim, only yid, maybe Nesachim. So nu Ebazeh Yachol, Nesachim, maybe even his carbon shouldn't have Nesachim with it. Tamalay Kacha. Only in this way, but the animal has to be done the correct way. No, it says kacha yasa. This is how you should do to a carbon. No, whatever the laws of carbon are, you have to do. No difference to eat or a goy. Second one, right? Where Rashi learns, I'm going back to Rab Shimon, that only kachim is be'ach. I say that there's no din of me'ila by goy to step down, but kachim of the bayis is my time. What's the difference? Because somebody holds ki gomna mila. Where do we learn mila from? We said at the top of the page. Chait mitruma. Because there's a Shabbat it says chait by truma. It says chait by mila, and we learn a number of din of mila from truma. So dumi truma. So when do we have this din of meila that only truma says you only eat that only eat not a goy when it's similar to truma? What do we know about truma? The food itself becomes kodesh. Truma, the kadisha kedusha aguf. The food itself becomes kodesh. Abu kedusha better gabayis, kedusha damin loy, but better gabayis, which is only the value. No, that's what we learned. Dam shenitma, blood that became tamei. Now the din is if an animal becomes, if the blood becomes an animal becomes tamei in the base of migdash, the tzitz is maratza, right? The kohen gadol wears a tzitz, and that atones for it, and to the extent that not only you're to the carbon, you can even eat the meat. But however, If it happened, we say don't split, don't zoy the blood, don't throw the blood on it because of tummy carbon. It's only once you already did the zrika, we say the tzitz is maratza. Now, if you did it b'shoigig, we say that it's maratza. If you did it b'mezid, we cancel you. You shouldn't have done it. Machlekes in the Gemara we had whether when we say memezid, we mean memezid that you made a tamei or memezid that after it became tamei you sprayed it on the mizbech. But either way, memezid we make the rabban counsel that you shouldn't go ahead and spray it. But if you did spray it, you still yaitz to the carbon, but the meat is in that case won't become mutter. And how do I know that? So Rashi says the whole pupil, because if the chacham will come along and say you're not yaitz to the carbon, that means you got to bring another one. And if you bring another one, it's chulin bazara because my hatayra. You already yaitz. It's only the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon can't come and create. They can sheval taisa to tell you not to do something, but they cannot tell you go against the Torah. The Torah says that this animal you bring in the second to replace it is only chulun because there's no need for it. And what the Chachamim say, no, go ahead and bring it, and we're making it. Can't do that. So it's talking about what the carbon will be yaitz regardless whether you can eat. But the Mezi did it on purpose. You spray the blood like hurtz. When you make this distinction about Yachid, when it comes to a communal carbon, bein b'shegig, bein b'mezid, lo yehurtza. What? Sorry, b'mezid b'hurtza. That by a carbon tzibur, we're not going to cancel any individual, and therefore we're going to say that it's hurtza. However, by Yechavim, bein b'shegig, lo hurtza. A goy is different. Now remember, according to Rabbi Yossi, a goy has the same dinner like a yid. He holds the carbon as the same. So the chayda, this goes according to Rabbi Shimon, who holds it a different eating a goy. I'm going to get a public come on. The like Rabbi Yossi definitely cannot be Rabbi Yossi because Rabbi Yossi, he holds that a eating a goy is exactly the same thing. So if by yid we make a chil shayim meiz, the same by goy. I'm going to papa. I feel Rabbi Yossi. A papa will say same Rabbi Yossi. Shining hosh namakra. It says in the pasuk when it comes to the tzitz, it says lahem. It says what do you call it? It says lahem. Lahem is as if it's limiting only to Yidden. So if we have a special pasuk by tzitz doesn't apply to a guy. Lahem la yulchavim. We had a few times now. Huna bar Nosson is one who's challenging a papa. So if you're making the drasha lahem, let me ask a question. It says in the pasuk by tumah. It says asher heim. And you say that Yossi holds what everything is the same, including tumah. It says in the pasuk by tumah. It says all the kabiyanazi you should separate from the kabbanas. Asher heim. Magdishim. According to you, you're saying Haim means only Yidden. So the laws of Tumah should apply by Goy. And Rabbi Yossi says, frame of fetish, that Tameh, no difference in Yidden or Goy, if Haim is correct. How can I mean Haim Rabbi Yossi says by a Goy, the din of Tumah is the same as by Yid. You'll get cutters if you ate a carbon of a Goy being tummy, but what about this Haim? But going back to tzitz, tzitz is only by Yid, but not from the word Haim. Because it says in the passage, L'rotzen, Lahem, it says L'rotzen. Bavilik, the Eibishter is accepting their is appeased. And Goyim are not b'nei Hatzah. Interesting idea.
How do you know that?
No, how do you know that? Then what's the point of being a carbon? Idea. The chosen people.
And that,
Certainly, we got like
I think he
the guy brings a carbon.
you want carbon?
Yeah.
He wants to have himself a warning.
So it sounds like, I'll tell you what it sounds like. There's a difference if you look at the animal, you look at the person. Till now, we were talking about beside the animal. Beside the animal, Yossi says the korban itself is the same like by Yid, no difference. Now, when we talk about the tzitz, we're talking about the Eibush is accepting your promise. There's a difference between the person who did it, a Yid and a Goy.
He said, reach that tzitz.
Say what did he say there? What's his word?
Okay, I
like Mepshah better. Maybe there's a difference and when because the Ratz is the person, not the animal, right? Because you have a chiv or whatever it is, a neder and a dava, and you want to discharge that. There's a chilik where the Eibush looks at a yid, the Eibush looks at a goy. So by a yid and the Ratz and by a goy, because maybe it's one of his mitzvahs, he's allowed to, and maybe that's what it means. It's not l'ratzon as a person, but till now the whole thing was about the animal. Once he's made a kodesh, what's the status of that kedusha? So maybe that's anyway. So we learned before that. Remember, the rule is when you chai pigel during the 4 avodas, because what? Because they are mat to something else. So even when you spray the blood, and you're thinking about eating the food on a different day or the mizbeach. But if you're thinking about the blood itself, or by kmitza, you're doing the kmitza, you think that the kmitza, will be, you'll eat it another time. or another time, since there's no other matter for it, there's no din of pigel because we learn from shlamim. But nevertheless, the other dinim apply. So, for example, if it's mamish noiser, machshava doesn't apply there. Because you need like shlamim, it's another matter. But if it's mamish noiser left over, of course you chayiv noiser. You still chayiv noiser if you ate the blood, or if we'll see in a minute. It's not the blood, but you ate the kmitza, for example. You're still chayiv, even though it's not, there's no pigel there. Machshava doesn't apply, but noiser chayiv. If you were tamei, still chayiv. All of these things still apply. No, you'll get cutters if you are tamei b'tumei chutz ben adam, except the blood. We'll see later why blood is different. There's no noiser by blood, or it's machlekes. There's only tumor, or even no noiser. Rav Shimon is mechayiv. Furthermore, but dover shedarken lechel. Rav Shimon says yechayiv only things which are normal, common to be eaten. So even though, for example, like kmitza and these things that we're talking about, even though there's no pigul there, but if you ate it noiser, yechayiv or tummy. Avala eats him. I've understood who eats wood. Eats him, even if you salt it. Because we had this idea of carbon. Rebbe holds this carbon eitzim. You can donate eitzim as a carbon. Forget about the eitzim to maracha. You can donate wood, and then he said you have to give kimitza. You have to salt it, and if you ate it, I don't know, maybe what a little tiny.
It has to be said, Hametzik time period referring to some outer part of the bark.
But the Kappas tomorrow says, what's shut Hametzik period? What does it mean? It doesn't make sense, he says. So he said the pshat like this. What are the four simonim? The four simonim to tell the difference if it's a lemon or an essig. And he says it's mahatayra. So machlekes is mahatayra and the rabbanon, all these simonim. And that's how we say we need a Messiah. He says one of them is mahatayra. Which one? Because what does time mean? What, the fruit tastes like the tree, like the bark of the tree? There's no. He says the essig is different than all other fruits. All of the fruits, the main thing is the fruit. And you have a little membrane on the skin on the outside. You cut open a lemon. Mainly it's lemon, and then you have a little bit of membrane. You open an essig, the majority of it is the membrane. It's very thick. The fruit is the smallest part. So what's the ikar of the pedi? The clipper. So therefore, exactly. So the H is the period the same because it doesn't mean the taste. It means it's the metzias. And that's one of the four simonim. And therefore he says that's mahatayda. That's what it means, tamei superior shava. Anyway, that's what he says. I will eat him, but wood and levina. Also, nobody eats the levina, the frankincense. Ba'aktoidus ain't chayoven aleim mishum tumah. Since it's not darker lechel, it's not normally eaten no tumah. I would have thought that if you were tummy and you ate it, you're not chayiv. It's like a pigel. Pigel, you're not chayiv unless it's matter something else. And over here, bein laden, bein lezbeyach. Oh, so for example, you ate the kmitza. You won't be chayiv if you were tummy. You don't know you're not allowed to eat it, but you won't get cutters. And makes a kabel. Pigel should be clear. Mother pigel. That is, what kind of carbon do you bring? A set carbon chatas. And all you have to know, all you have to know is after you did it. Oh, I made a mistake, right? Carbon chatas. Well, a hut miklali is never permitted. Pigel. And yet you only limited the chiv is only if this is matter something else. Tumah should first of all be elevated. What kind of carbon do you bring by tumah? Depending how rich you are. You had to have a knowledge before you were tumah. You had to forget. Remember Gemara Shavuos in the beginning. You had to know. You had to forget. You had to know afterwards. And if the tzibur is tumah, it's mutter, so it's weak. And surely you should limit it to only that. Therefore it says, Asher heim magdishim li any carbon. In the passage where it talks about people, it says any carbon. Ashehem magdishim li. Right? It says there by Tumah. We know Israel and finish it off. Ashehem magdish. Any carbon that make for me. So therefore it applies even to kmitza and these things. Yochar would have thought miyad. So I would have thought as soon as you magdish the carbon, if you ate it betumah before even you did all the spraying and all that, you should be high ready for tumah. It says yikrav. Once you're makivit. It says in the pasuk. It says, "Tell them that anybody who approaches a carbon and he's tamei, he gets cutters." What approaching? Well, you just touch it. Well, you just touch it, and you're chai already. But you did all the stages, including the zrika, to make it ready to be brought on mizbeach. How do we learn that? If let's say you need another stage before it, moshe flesh to put the emudi, the fats on the mizbech, you need another. I think the Aruch says a murin is mar from the word master, because this is the chosh is a part of the carbon. That's the mock of the word a murin. So if you did all the stages that prior to that you including the zrika, then and you ate it afterwards, you ate it while you were tummy, you get cutters. Ain't limited, and let's say it's not something that has a matzah, let's say the committee, it's matzah itself. Mishiyidish Mikela, as soon as you put it in the clay shutters, and that, because that's the last stage before you do whatever it has to be done, then you're ready chai for tumah. Ashkran tumah. Okay, so we know tumah that applies. That the noisim and nolan. How do you know noisim? The same thing applies that you're chayiv for noisim, even though pickle you won't be chayiv if it's not. Before we had chil. The leila for your okay, we have a choice. You can learn chil matuma, but you can also learn oven. We had before the gzer shava. Remember, we had a double gzer shava from pigel. And what does pigel tell you? That if this does not have something else that's matter it is his own last stage. There's no pigel. So the should be the din should be that there should be no din of noiser as well. And Simon says, it makes more sense to learn for Tumah to be Mechayiv. Why? Shekain, in three things they're in common. Gezel. Gezel is Gimel is Goof. They're both the Tumah is in the goof, and Noiser is the animal itself. But Shenkein, what's the pigel? Pigel's in your mind. Nothing to do with the animal. And Zayin is man. Sorry, and Zayin is what's the Zayin again? Zrika, right? They both have to do with the after the Zrika, and also the Lamed, which is Chol. Both of them, the pasuk says that you are considered you desecrate the carbon. Simon, that's three. You have more things in common. First of all, they're both nicer. Pigel is thinking about the wrong time, and nicer is real. Tzitz, that both of them, the tzitz doesn't work. Both of them try the animal is tired. It's not like tumah with animals tummy here. Side sits in there, side pigel and side nicer is tired. And even though the Rabbanon, we said that nicer afterwards is tummy, so many Rabbanon. And Bisman, they both deal with time. Pigel and nicer is and Korov. What's the last one? Korov. I remember I know what the last one is. And you know I'll be makravit. Yep. Sorry.
The next Pigel, Shnei Machna Psuhu, the Davar Karvat, the Sakachin, the Felban, to Mashlenkin, is a time I come and I play the Shah Psuhu to Badam.
Okay, so there's the person on makriv, and there's an animal itself. Behind the fisher, and some more. We learn that from a different place altogether. How do you know that there's pasuk? You know they're talking about even something that's possible. Tamalayim, it says you shouldn't bechal. By tumah it says in plural. We're talking about tumah. So why is it yachal? B'shnei b'chalulin kakasur. This pasuk of tumah is talking about two different kinds of chalulim. It doesn't say echad psul noiser ve'echad psul tumah. Tell you that not only tumah do we say this din, but also by noiser that what if even though that there's no davar mata, this is the last stage. Let's say the kmitza, it doesn't matter if it's just like if it's tamei or over. So too, if it becomes noiser by kmitza, you'll be chayiv for noiser and you get kodesh and everything else. Even though the pigel of it, you won't be chayiv, but the nois, if a lepoil is left over beyond this man, you'll be chayiv kodesh because we learn from the puzzle yechalu b'nei Yisrael. So lashon rabbi mishnei chulun kosim medaber. We'll stop over here. See you tomorrow.